Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives. We have Jonathan Sporn. Dr. Sporn is a board certified psychiatrist educated and trained at Duke, the University of Miami, Tufts, the Boston Psychoanalytic Institute, and Harvard University. After practicing psychiatry in Boston and doing research at Mass General Hospital, Dr. Sporn worked at the National Institutes of Health, where he was chief of the OCD Clinic and helped to start up the Mood and Anxiety Program, which progressed research on ketamine and glutamate in depression. Dr. Sporn left the NIMH for Johnson & Johnson, where he worked on drug development in psychiatry and neurology. He then moved to Pfizer, where he worked on the development of Lyrica and was the clinical disease area expert in neuroscience focused on psychiatry and addictions and the Neuroscience External R&D leader before exiting Pfizer to found the biotech company Perception Neuroscience, which is developing arketamine in neuropsychiatry. Dr. Sporn exited Perception Neuroscience to ATAI Life Science and was the chief science officer. He has subsequently left Perception Neuroscience to co-found another biotech company, Gilgamesh Pharmaceuticals, that is a collaboration with Columbia University developing novel psychedelic-inspired therapies as the next generation of therapies. Gilgamesh Pharma includes many medicinal chemists as well as experienced drug developers. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Psyched stage.
Oh, hi, sorry. Can you hear me all right now?
Yep, you're good.
Great, thank you. So thanks for the kind introduction. And so I'm going to start out by just, you heard a little bit about me. I wanted to just give you a little bit of additional information about my, oops, what happened? Oh no. Oh no. Did that just cut off? Ugh. Let's see. Whoops. Oh, there we go. I think. Yeah. So let's see. I'm not sure if you can see my screen at this point because it just.
Yep, you're good.
The phone just rang. So okay. So I was just going to tell you a little bit about me and how I got interested in this whole space and in a sense, and it kind of goes back to a time when I was in college and at Duke University, and I was on my way to or from, and I ended up having a psilocybin experience with some shamans in Florida by some strange just a strange coincidence, and it had this tremendous influence on me. Not knowing anything at that point as a 19-year-old or something about this field or psychopharmacology, I recall in a kind of flash memory how this affected me in terms of absorbing me around the area of sort of self-observation and knowing something about the way my own mind and psyche worked that I would have never really sort of I certainly wouldn't have thought about in the same sort of reflective way. So it really it changed the course of where I was going, and I think led me to then, in a sense, become a psychiatrist and somehow strangely to end up where I am today. So I think, as the introduction indicated, we've very recently started a very interesting company called Gilgamesh Pharmaceuticals, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, is, some of you may know, as an interesting story about a king who has somewhat of a depression and has somewhat of a kind of some personality issues and ends up going into the underworld and finds a medicinal plant and is kind of transformed. And it's an old story a very ancient story, and also new in that it wasn't discovered till the 19th century. So we thought it was a cool name for a drug company. And what we're trying to do with this company is develop novel psychotropic drugs that are inspired by psychedelic drugs in large part. And so many of the programs we're working on are, although these are drugs that our medicinal chemists are synthesizing and creating, they are very much influenced or start with things like a lot of psychedelic drugs that started also as related to the natural world, arketamines that led to LSD, or 5-HT2A agonists that like psilocybin. So we're following these are sort of the teachers, but just like penicillin originally came from moldy bread, these things have to then be refined, and we're trying to create brand new molecules that have differentiation and have value for the treatment of psychiatric conditions. So we believe we have a kind of epic vision in this space, where we're trying to really create a cutting edge neuroscience company. So it's combining neuroscientists at Columbia University and others at Harvard and other places, and Stanford, with neuroscientists, with medicinal chemists who specifically have a lot of expertise around psychedelic related drugs and drug discovery kinds of approaches, and this we think is somewhat unique. There's a number of individuals like that around, but knowing both medicinal chemistry and knowing the history of the psychedelic drug world are somewhat unusual. Certainly for me, having come from academia and from in the past from big companies like Johnson and Johnson and Pfizer and such. So it's a very exciting area. And again, we're trying to develop new molecules. Everybody, I assume if you're listening to this meeting, you're very aware of the extent of the mental health crisis, and this couldn't be a better time, obviously, to be basically looking at how we change people's minds, given not just the crisis that has been going on for a long time, but of course the whole COVID epidemic and the recent turmoil in our country and the United States and around the world now around prejudice and discrimination and the pain related to that. All sort of, I think, all speaks to the criticality right now of developing better treatments. And depression, as most of the people on the phone probably, or the call really know, is a leading cause of disability and worldwide. And for example, anxiety is probably the most prevalent mental illness, and these kinds of treatments are ripe to affect these sorts of things. There is for reasons that are complicated to go into, a wasteland of innovation in the field. I'm a little bit old, and I started out, practicing when Prozac was just developed, and I remember how exciting that was, because it allowed me to, for example, treat obsessive compulsive disorder and give people drugs that, if they took an overdose wouldn't be fatal. So I remember that, and I feel I have that same excitement now, but I think that this is a much more powerful time with treatments that will be basically safer, have a higher therapeutic index, as we say in the field. But despite that, a lot of the big companies have left this area. So there's been a tremendous lack of, there's a tremendous dearth right now of investment. And we're looking to change that by bringing novel treatments. So we think that there's a novel psychedelic related therapy revolution that's going on. And as you're all aware, this has been driven in part by destigmatization, decriminalization efforts. It's on the heels of what's happened with the cannabis space, and also, I felt myself almost to be maybe hallucinating about a year ago when I was at the a scientific meeting, and the U.S. FDA was presenting, and a lot of these guys are in the national into the public health service, so they wear like military uniforms with all sorts of medals on them, and they were up there, talking about how excited they were about psychedelic drugs, but the challenges of how you deal with the science of blinding, because it's hard to placebo control for these sorts of things. But the interest in it, and the breakthrough status some of these things have now received, like psilocybin and MDMA, is with the FDA, with regulators, is really quite remarkable. Of course, as folks know, there's sort of pre-Michael Pollan and post-Michael Pollan in the world, and we think that just between that cultural, some of these cultural events and the regulatory interest makes this the right time. So we're looking to unlock the potential of what people sometimes call these previously stigmatized medicines, but by not developing the actual medicines like psilocybin or things like that are been around a long time and exist, but by creating novel molecules that work through the same target or the same receptor systems, and that we can make into better treatments, either by changing, for example, how long the experience lasts, or making it safer, and trying to kind of make therapies that could go mainstream, and leveraging what we've learned both in the past and also more recently as these things have become accepted. So I think that as this slide sort of says, but the trip's not easy because of a lot of the things that are going on lack very strong intellectual property. We're really mostly interested in treatments where the intellectual property or the patent is on a new molecule that's never been in existence before, and that has properties that make it special or better. And that's the critical kind of thing, is having people with the right scientific and chemistry tools to do that, and improve the safety. So we're taking psychedelic medicinal chemists, drug discovery, neuroscience expertise, and turning that into new medicines, new treatments in the future that don't exist now, but that we can imagine. So we're a discovery company, but we'll be moving fast to develop that discovery operation into a choice of specific products or specific things that we can make into products in our pipeline. And we're doing this as kind of, in summary, we're both there's the chemistry, but there's also then a change in the world now also around things that are known as biomarkers or companion diagnostics, where we can use and our team, some of the folks on our team have already created the proof of concept for this, where you can take a drug that has a very modest effect, like a Prozac or a Zoloft or that sort of thing, and use machine learning and artificial intelligence to show who should get it, who will do really well with that drug. And as a psychiatrist, I remember vividly well some of the patients who had this sort of dramatic experience with drugs that generally have don't have a great, tremendous, large effect, but in the right individuals, they do. So someone with an anxiety disorder, I recall, one patient who was a software vice president of a software company, and after getting him finally to take a little bit of a Zoloft, or Zoloft as an SSRI, I recall that he said he was better than his original normal state, and so it was clear that for him that he had the neurobiology that made that drug extremely valuable. But that's not the case. So who to give these drugs to is really a critical element, and that's one of the things we're working on. Another just thing I just want to point out that I've been thinking about in my own head recently is just how we will use how we can marshal the placebo response in in drug development, the placebo response is mainly thought of as a pain in the neck. It gets in the way of seeing the difference between the drug and an inert substance in clinical trials. But with things like psychedelic drugs, where you're thinking about things like set and setting and the way these drugs potentially operate, you may be looking at, there may be ways to create a synergistic effect between the drug and the powerful biology of the placebo response, which could be again a very different way of doing drug development than we were trained to do. And so these are generally going to be sort of circuit first approaches where you're changing the neuroplasticity of the brain that allows for new experience and new ways to sort of consider things for people that are sort of locked in. And our company, the more business strategy for the company is to take, these new molecules, have really great expertise in this area and develop them through what's called proof of concept or phase 2A, at which point we would then work with larger companies to do more of the industrial strength trials to get them on the market. So we'll focus on the discovery, and then once we get there, the early development period, once we have a product. So we think that this approach will give us a sort of a fast way to and a more drug discovery and development is a super high risk field. A lot of drugs, they fail. Most things fail in discovery before you have a product, and then if they don't, then they oftentimes have failed in late stage development, which is super expensive and has led to a lot of companies saying the heck with this. So we think that by understanding trip reports, understanding the history of of what molecules have been tried by humans, and understanding some of the neurobiology, what's called in chemistry the structural activity relationship, we can make this a less risky and faster approach. So we're building this elite medicinal chemistry and drug development team. We have an artificial intelligence, machine learning group, neurobiological strategies. Of course, the regulatory landscape is important. We'll also be looking beyond the pill. We have a work stream looking at gamification of psychotherapies using digital media that allows for both enhancing the set and setting and also the integration work that goes on afterwards, as well as our association with Columbia University, which is starting its own psychedelic institute under the leadership of Jeff Lieberman, who's the chairman of psychiatry. And we expect that in addition to the several $1 million that the National Institute of Drug Abuse has put into our partner lab at Columbia, that there'll be a lot of additional interactions with the government that's, of course, interested in bringing new treatments forward, as well as not the nonprofit. So we're going to bring basically a robust discovery pipeline across several mechanisms of action. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of the kind of things we're doing within Gilgamesh and with our Columbia partners. So we decided that microdosing is a very controversial topic. This sort of sub-perceptual doses of something like a tenth of the dose of, say, LSD, of a trip dose of LSD, and we decided that these are very effective potentially for anxiety, for cognition, potentially as a better treatment for attention deficit disorder, et cetera. But it's problematic in the larger population because people, to get it approved by the FDA and everybody to feel comfortable with it, you don't want it to be such that people are often non-adherent. If they take 10 times more, they're going to have a problem. So we basically have created a program that essentially creates new molecules that are inspired by natural products but are synthetics, that will basically have a ceiling effect, what's called limited Emax, so that even if someone they're supposed to take 2 tablets and they take 8 tablets, they're not going to have a psychedelic experience, but they will have a microdose, an experience that's the same as a microdose experience of taking a microdose of LSD or psilocybin. So we think that this would be potentially a way to have a near side effect free therapy regime that would be used maybe a couple times a week or something by patients, and potentially be as effective or more effective than all existing therapies, and be very safe enough that people can use them at home. So this is the sort of microdose by design strategy Gilgamesh is taking, and we just use microdosing here as a sort of, because of it's a cultural meme right now, but it's really just novel therapies that will have that kind of biology. These are 5-HT2A agonists. They're classic, hitting the classic 5-HT2 receptor that psychedelics hit, but at a milder, with a much milder, safer effect for specific indications. For example, a lot of patients with depression have a lot of cognitive interference. So that would be the kind of, this is an example of the kind of strategy. We have intellectual property filed on this program, as we do with all of ours. So these are basically using medicinal chemistry approaches to understand both the chemistry, the drug receptor interactions, as well as the behavioral effects of these drugs, and how to then create a microdose-like experience. Another example is Gilgamesh probably has arguably has access to probably the largest collection of analogs of ibogaine. These are under a option agreement from Columbia University, where we have an exclusive option. And the founders of the company, I'm a founder myself, and Andrew Krugel and Dolly Samish, who both have been working in this area around ibogaine biology, which is a very complex biology for a decade. And we've essentially created they've created essentially a whole bunch of different molecules that are related to ibogaine, some of which we think may even be more powerful than ibogaine, which is, some of is a medicine that's from the bark of a plant in Western Central Africa, and it creates a very powerful psychedelic-like, dreamlike state with very vivid memory recall, and allows sort of a reset of some of the maladaptive behavioral behaviors that are seen in individuals who have addiction to opiates or other addictions and other maladaptive habits. So there are clinics in places like Cancun that administer these things, in a kind of white glove way, but we want to basically create new molecules that will be, have a good safety profile and be very powerful to treat opiate addiction. As I mentioned, the National Institute of Drug Abuse, the NIH has poured now very recently several $1 million into the Columbia lab that we're partnering with, and which we've optioned the portfolio from, and we're working right now and we'll be working very intensively then to take this very complex pharmacology of ibogaine and figure out which molecule will be the safest and the most powerful for both substance use disorders, but potentially for other things. Some of the problems with ibogaine involve like cardiac rhythm issues, what's called QTc prolongation. So we're looking at both the safety and the efficacy, and these will we expect to retain the psychedelic effect. We're not trying to get rid of that in general, and these will be treatments used in a controlled setting with physiological monitoring, and so there are multiple what are called scaffolds, different forms of these things. And just to give you one quick example, if you look just to orient you on the white screen on the bottom right here, what you can see is that this is an experiment with rats, and these rats have been addicted to morphine. So they're extremely addicted to morphine, and they've been trained to press a lever which injects them with morphine. So they can press the lever a certain amount of times and they'll get an injection of morphine, and they're quite addicted. And what you can see this is an experiment with one of these analogs, and it's comparing it to noribogaine. In rodents, ibogaine, noribogaine look pretty much equally effective in terms of reducing morphine self-administration in rodents. So this is one dose of either one of the compounds Gilgamesh is going to be working with, potentially, that it's optioning from Columbia, or noribogaine itself, the natural metabolite of ibogaine. And what you can see is that after a single dose, the animals that got this analog of ibogaine basically don't self-administer morphine to themselves for days. For it looks like probably what you can see, at least 5 days, it's essentially close to zero, and then it slowly goes up a little bit. And you can see with noribogaine also it drops down to zero, but then it starts to more quickly kind of come back up where they start to self-administer. So this is an example where if this kind of data holds, it looks like the compound that we're looking at in our discovery labs may be actually more powerful than ibogaine against addiction, at least if these animal models hold. So essentially this is a way to a very different approach to treating substance use disorders than what is now the standard of care, which often is a replacement therapy. Just basically giving another opioid like methadone, which also has its own safety issues. So we think that this is a very novel approach and for resetting and interrupting addiction. And we think this will be very, very exciting. One of the other things, whenever you're trying to create a new company, and in this case, we want to have a combination of both chemists, drug developers, artificial intelligence experts, et cetera, that make this all work. So there's myself and some of the founders, some other folks from that are like process engineers from Berkeley that I worked with in industry, et cetera. A whole team of people that will make this kind of thing. Amit Etkin's involved, who worked with the Nobel laureate Eric Kandel. So by the way, I'm just proud to. So these are just giving you an idea. It's a big team. There's many functions in a drug company. People doing manufacturing and commercial assessments, pharmacists, operations people. So we've got a big team. And one of the things we're very proud of right now is that we were just accepted to be what's called a Y Combinator company. Companies like Airbnb started out as Y Combinator companies, which is Y Combinator is an accelerator. And so we've just entered the 2020 summer batch as a Y Combinator company, which gives us tremendous accessibility to expertise and investors and people interested in Silicon Valley and other places around the world in this area. So we're very excited, and I think it was maybe there were 12,000 applications to get accepted into Y Combinator. So we're very pleased at that. We've also put together and are continuing to put together a scientific advisory board. In this case, from University of Chicago, from Columbia, from Harvard, et cetera. And this will, again, help us to do the kind of cutting edge science that we think will make this all work. So I'll stop there and ask for see if there are questions at all.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much. Really, really love everything you had to say. I'd love to start off just kind of pulling from the beginning of your talk, talking about, kind of seeing all of this unfold over many years of time and, being there at the beginnings of Prozac, for instance. What are some of the things you think, we should be aware of over the next 10 years of psychedelic compounds and medicines? Do you see some of the, unfortunate things that have come from antidepressants repeating themselves within the psychedelic space as well?
Well, I think there's going to be both sides of it. I think what's, oftentimes whenever there's anything really innovative and new that happens, and of course psychedelics are old and new, there's always going to be all kinds of learning lessons. And I think what's different, I think here is that I think these treatments are going to be even more powerfully interactive with experience, with behavioral approaches than and I think one of the lessons we can learn is not to get caught into this trap where people are promising a drug alone as a silver bullet, without without paying attention to then what kinds of what you do with that individual other than give them a medicine. And I think that was driven by the large amount of dollars and the large it was a big industry, and it was sort of driven in terms of everything's a chemical imbalance. And it's not that genetics and biology are not really important. It's just that if you only focus on that, I think it's a big mistake. And so I think that this is also just I think one of the things I've heard the most of from people that resonates is people that are taking, for example, the standard treatments now, and they feel apathetic, they feel a little blunted, they're more stress resistant, but they just don't feel the full range of emotions. They kind of don't give a shit. But they're afraid to stop them because they know they were like extremely ill or suicide, they're very afraid of not being on them. So it becomes a catch-22. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges. How do we transition individuals? How do we put together the right treatment regime, and also not overpromise things, as I was suggesting?
Definitely. I also wanted to ask about one of the concepts you introduced, kind of microdosing by design, throughout this. So, are you talking about basically, someone having ADHD and anxiety, would they be taking, different compounds at different dosages, or would there be kind of like a, similar microdosing solution for many of those ailments?
I think the latter. Again, I think what we'd like to do with all of these treatments is individualize it so that we'll be able to have you come into your doctor's office, and let's say you say, gee, Dad, I have anxiety, my mood's a little off, and I always had this problem with inattention. Those often go together, by the way. And that, in about 20 minutes of you eyes open, eyes closed with a dry electrode EEG headset, and the data is basically sent off to Palo Alto to the central readers, we'd be able to tell you what is the probability of you, say, responding well to our microdose by design compound, whatever that ends up being. It's early days, but we're at the stage now, where we essentially designed a set of compounds, and now we're narrowing down to which one we'll put into people, and that'll be, when it becomes a product. Or part of the product pipeline. So right now it's in discovery, but yes, it'll be such that we'll expect that for a certain subset of people, not everyone, that these will be very powerful ways to improve attention, improve anxiety symptoms or mood symptoms, but with much less of the burden of, say, having to take a amphetamine every day, as millions of people do, as you know.
Definitely. And, we've seen the entry of companies like Johnson & Johnson into the psychedelic space. One of the questions is, when will larger, more traditional pharma companies begin getting involved with psychedelic medicines, the top 10 pharma companies in the world?
Yeah, my experience having been there is that they're a bit like lemmings. They come and go. It might be more mid-sized pharma companies for the start, because it may be start with some of these things to be a little bit more of a boutique market. And but I think that what you'll see is once, and in this case, Johnson & Johnson really, because of actually, it was my colleagues that I worked with at NIH who went to Johnson & Johnson and pushed that, but it really, it was out of their comfort zone, I believe, for Johnson & Johnson. They're not used to developing an isomer of a drug that's old, that doesn't have much patent protection, and the sort of thing, and that has to be. So I think that it'll be such that that once it's clear that there's a model that works, they will show up. I have no doubt about that, because the unmet need is large. So it's a matter of showing the value, and getting and that value, like a lot of fields, are driven in part by the citizens advocating. You saw that with the AIDS epidemic, right? It was tremendous push by patients and their families to you even saw it when cardiovascular disease with the statins, where all these great drugs for cardiovascular disease, but the insurance companies didn't want to pay for them, and it took studies by the companies and creating data that showed that these were so effective and so much better that the insurance companies couldn't argue anymore.
Just one more question. I know we're running a bit late, but this one comes from Harsh Taneja. Just wondering, do you think that classical psychedelics or newer analogs are going to have the potential to treat persistent negative symptoms commonly with schizophrenia, spectrum disorders, things like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes up quite a bit. I think that that those negative symptoms, I think, could be treated in theory with some of these types of compounds. However, that being said, it's also a significant risk. And of course, some, things like the psychedelics were used to sort of try to create psychosis-like states for studying psychosis back over many years. So I think it's possible. I don't think that's out of the question. I think it'll probably have to be at doses that are different and done in ways that are a little bit different than what we think about now. But so I don't think it'll be full reset psychedelic doses in that population, because I think it'll put them at risk of relapse.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jonathan. We really appreciate it and loved hearing from you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.